Welcome to Pen and Perspective, where the story always knows more than it's telling. Every word is intentional. Every silence holds a truth. Let's get into it. In part one, everything was in pieces. A case that moved too fast, a narrative that didn't hold under pressure, and just enough evidence to know something was wrong, but not enough yet to prove who made it that way. Terrell needed alignment, and when the expose dropped, everything that didn't make sense finally started to. Let's get into part two. Final update. The night the expose dropped, Terrell didn't look at it on his phone. He waited until he got back to his office. Lights off, jacket still on, door locked. He watched it on his laptop, then printed out the transcript word for word. Because Terrell never trusted anything that couldn't be held, annotated, cross-referenced. Digital was for speed. Paper was for truth. Walter's name was there, not framed as a villain or reckless, framed as useful, a successful developer, a clean record, a crash that moved too fast, a blood alcohol claim that collapsed under scrutiny, a case that advanced at a pace that only made sense if no one planned to slow it down. Terrell didn't smile. He exhaled. Because this wasn't revelation, and this was confirmation. He did all he knew to do, again. He filed before sunrise, motions to vacate, requests for immediate review, subpoenas stacked and ready. He didn't ask permission. He applied pressure. He leveraged relationships he rarely ever used. Federal inquiries, independent reviews. It was time to go around the wall disguised as justice. The system responds to two things: embarrassment and liability. The expose brought both. Within hours, calls started coming in. Not threats, not apologies. Questions? What exactly are you alleging? On what basis are you filing? Can we discuss timelines? Terrell kept his answers precise. You already have the documents, he said more than once. You just chose not to look. Dante's arrest came fast, too fast for coincidence. Terrell read the charges once, then again. He didn't feel satisfaction. He felt alignment. Systems don't correct themselves out of conscience. They correct when pressure comes from multiple angles at once. Dante was leverage, whether he knew it or not. Herald and bells hadn't changed. Same low amber lights, same crowded tables packed too close together, same hum of voices that made everything feel half private even when it wasn't. Places like this survived because they didn't try to be anything else. Tyler smiled first. Damn, he said, pulling Terrell into a hug that lingered half a second longer than expected. You still look like you don't sleep. Terrell huffed. You still look like you ran from L.A. and lived to tell it. That part, Tyler said, stepping back. Barely. They laughed, the kind that came easy because it didn't have to fill silence. Terrell noticed Tyler clocked the room the same way he did. Exits, corners, faces, old habits never left, they just quieted down. So, Terrell said, finally leaning back, you really been gone 15 years and came back like no time passed? Tyler smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Time passed? Just not here? They talked about the easy things first, Tyler's work, his kids, the city he'd landed in and stayed in longer than planned. Terrell filled him in on surface-level wins, careful not to turn the table into a deposition. Eventually, the conversation bent where it was always going to bend. How's she holding up? Terrell asked quietly. Tyler exhaled. As good as someone can be when the ground keeps shifting. Everyone nodded. They all stayed longer than planned. Plates cleared, drinks refreshed, stories loosened. Tyler told one about them sneaking out after curfew years ago. Sandra rolled her eyes. Terrell laughed harder than he expected to. For a brief stretch it felt like before courtrooms and affidavits and whispered threats. When everyone stood to leave, Tyler clasped Terrell's shoulder. You doing everything you can, big dog, he said. Not a question. Terrell met his gaze. Everything, brother. Outside, as Terrell watched Tyler walk off into the night, he felt the familiar tightening in his chest. Some things you carry because you have to. Some things you carry because you choose to. And some things, family, loyalty, truth, you carry whether you're ready or not. Taylor's arrest the next morning didn't shock Terrell. What shocked him was how quickly she folded. Not out of malice, out of fear. Fear of being the only one left holding consequences. Terrell didn't judge her. He filed more paperwork. Because remorse doesn't undo damage, action does. The meeting with Brian happened after Walter asked for it. Terrell didn't want to be there, but he stayed. He listened as Brian explained the document, the pressure, the moment he should have walked away. Terrell watched faces as Brian spoke, who softened, who stayed rigid, who recalculated. He didn't interrupt. When it was over, Terrell spoke once. "You did the wrong thing," he said calmly. "Then you did the right thing. Those two facts will have to live next to each other." Brian nodded. Terrell wasn't absolving him. He was contextualizing him. The case didn't just reopen, it unraveled. Too many corners had been cut. Too many assumptions stacked on top of one another. Terrell didn't gloat. He documented. Nearly 2 years of fixation. A firm running without him at full capacity. A reputation sharpened by refusal. But he'd gained something else. Clarity. He'd seen how easily truth could be rerouted and how much effort it took to drag it back into daylight. He didn't regret it. Not once. When the call came that Walter was being released pending further investigation, Terrell closed his eyes. Just for a second. Not relief, release. 2 years of tension leaving his chest all at once. He met Sandra, the family, and the friend group at the jail. There were supporters outside already, even though it was early morning. Walter looked thinner, sharper around the eyes, but he stood straight. "I told you," Terrell said quietly when they hugged. "We weren't wrong." Walter nodded. "Walter is home. The investigation is active. The narrative has shifted. And Terrell is still standing, still watching, still ready, because some cases don't end when a man walks free. Some cases only begin when the system realizes it picked the wrong one." Epilogue. Harold never looked like a man who used to carry a badge. On a Sunday afternoon, he stood at the stove in socks, humming off-key while stirring a pot he'd started too late. His youngest sat at the counter doing homework she didn't want to finish. His oldest was halfway through a story Harold had already heard twice, pausing every few sentences to ask if the ending made sense. Harold nodded like it did. It always did. He had learned a long time ago how to be fully present while his mind worked somewhere else. That was the thing about him. He didn't disappear when he thought. He stayed right where you left him. When the kids scattered and the house settled into that quiet that only comes after noise, Harold rinsed the dishes slowly. He didn't rush. He never did. People who rushed missed things. He wiped the counter, dried his hands, and finally opened the folder he'd tucked under the mail earlier that day. He didn't label folders with names, he labeled them with patterns. This one had been building for over 2 years. Harold hadn't needed Terrell to tell him something was wrong. He'd felt it the first time the case crossed his radar, the same way he'd felt things when he was still working with Bureau and learning which instincts to trust. Back then, he'd believed the system would correct itself if you pushed hard enough in the right places. He was wrong. It took him longer than he liked to admit to realize the bad actors moved faster than the good ones because they didn't need permission. That was why he left. Harold didn't miss the Bureau. He missed effectiveness. Out here, working quietly, he could follow a thread without explaining why. He could ask questions that sounded like curiosity instead of interrogation. He could sit in barbershops, court hallways, parking lots, and living rooms, and people talked to him because he felt safe, like someone who wouldn't turn their words into weapons. He flipped through the pages slowly. The officer without a consistent assignment but a consistent presence. Harold had clocked him months ago, not enough to move on, but enough to remember. T. Greaves getting jumped after checking the intersection. That had been a warning, not retaliation. Harold knew the difference. He also knew why Tigress hadn't told the group. Loyalty ran deep there. So did restraint. Michelle's note. That one surprised him less than it probably should have. She was observant. Harold respected that. Larry's family involvement sat exactly where he'd expected it to. Close enough to matter. Far enough to deny. The brother doing it personally told Harold everything he needed to know about how serious the message had been meant to be. He hadn't told Terrell any of this. Harold was surgical that way. He knew when information clarified truth and when it only created noise. Some things belonged in files, not courtrooms. Some things were leverage for later, not now. Terrell trusted him because Harold never brought him clutter. He closed the folder and slid it back into place. What mattered was already done. The case had cracked where it needed to. The timing, the paperwork, the shortcuts, the missing resistance, enough to reopen, enough to pull at threads that unraveled faster than anyone expected once pressure was applied in the right places. Harold smiled faintly to himself. Harold headed upstairs, already thinking about the next quiet conversation, the next harmless question, the next place the pattern might show itself if someone knew how to look. This wasn't the end. Marcus was looking for a hand, not a name, not yet. Names were sloppy. Names made people visible too early. Marcus followed how paperwork moved faster than policy allowed, how resistance evaporated at just the right moments, how the same few institutional doors kept swinging open no matter who knocked. What Terrell saw as acceleration, Marcus saw as choreography. The flash drive hadn't given him answers so much as confirmation. It showed him how decisions traveled, which approvals came without discussion, which objections were never raised. It mapped the negative space, the people who should have been present but weren't. Someone was removing friction. Marcus understood systems well enough to know that kind of access from long-standing relationships built quietly inside bureaucracies that prided themselves on procedure. That's what interested him. Not Walter's case in isolation, but how easily it had been shaped, how cleanly it had been guided into inevitability, and how familiar the pattern felt, because this wasn't the first time Marcus had seen it. Somewhere in the margins, between zoning approvals, enforcement discretion, and paperwork that never quite touched a judge's desk, someone had learned how to move without being seen. Marcus intended to find them, not by asking who they were, but by understanding how they thought. You've been listening to Pen and Perspective. If it sat in your spirit, let it linger. If it stirred something in you, don't ignore it. I'm Miana DK, and before I put my pen down, tell me, whose perspective should I sit with next?